Welcome everyone to another Observability Lab. Today we're moving from notifications to human-in-the-loop agentic operations. Just a little while ago, Sonia, thank you so much for being back. Sonia, you've showed us how to send notifications through using simple workflows from Dynatrace to Slack to email. Today we are moving into the next step. We really want to move from simple notifications to really agentic operations. And there's a lot of cool stuff around advanced features in workflows, leveraging Dynatrace Intelligence. But without further ado, Sonia, thank you so much for being back. And please let me know what you have prepared for us today. And let's jump right in.
Thank you, Andy, and hi. So today, I want to go a bit beyond the simple workflow use case that we have discussed in the last video to give you an overview of what is a workflow in Dynatrace, what are the different building blocks, some useful information. And I want to start by giving you a short overview of all kind of use case that you can use workflows for, just to give you some ideas on what is the next thing you'd like to automate in your system. So of course, beyond notification, workflow is an amazing tool to help you in the whole incident response and management, but also to go beyond that and to help you automate remediation and implement runbooks. So you have always that problem that is happening, and then you can have a workflow that take care of it and that automate things so that you don't have to do always the same work manually. It's also a great tool in helping you with finding security findings and threat triage. When you have maybe thousands of different events, you want to be able to aggregate it and get an automation that tells you, okay, what are the things that are important, what should you focus on, and cross-check with other information in the system. But you can also use workflow to integrate and orchestrate across your tool chain, so really interact with other tools that you have in your organization. And it can also help you to administrate Dynatrace to help you with the operational maintenance, with governance, with cost optimization of Dynatrace and of your system. So if you can have workflow that run and looks at your cloud workload and realize that some things are running on too big machine, then can help you to also get visibility into that and look into your costs.
Cool. Awesome. And I also like the reporting in the end. I'm a big fan of the daily Dynatrace assisted report that tells me anything that I need to know before to get started with my day and things like that. Obviously, the sky is the limit. A lot of great use cases. Let's jump into, I guess, some workflow one-on-ones.
Yeah, so this is just a couple of keywords that we are going to look into details, and jumping into the product right after that slide. We are going to look at what are workflow triggers, what are the tasks and actions, what is the difference between a simple and a standard workflows, what is the draft mode versus the live mode, what is the actor of the workflow. We're going to talk about the Jinja expressions, about workflow results. How do you see the result of a workflow of what happened with that specific operation, with that specific workflow execution. We are going to talk about a very important feature, the approval request. That's the feature that helps you to stop the workflow and ask for a human to look at what's going on and to approve the next step without before moving further. We're going to look also at sub-workflow. At some point, you might want to have a workflow that is being used by different workflows, so you can put all that logic into one workflow and calling it from different workflow, or also to help do more advanced looping functionality of a certain part of your workflow. And then we're going to talk about agentic workflow. So first, what's the difference between a workflow that is not agentic and a workflow with an agentic step. We're going to shortly look at Dynatrace Intelligence preview, that you can use to build your agentic workflow. And then at the end, we're going to bring all together into one example of an agentic workflow, which is the Kubernetes troubleshooting agent workflow.
Wow, that's a lot of things you've prepared, Sonia. Thank you so much, folks. If you're watching this and if you want to jump to a particular part, we try to do a good job in the YouTube playlist on the bottom, the different chapters. You can jump right to different sections that we're going to cover. Okay, so check this out. But yeah, Sonia, thank you so much. And I think let's jump into the demo.
Exactly. So I'm in one of our demo system, and I'm in the Dynatrace Workflows application. This is where everything starts. And I'm going to start by clicking on the plus to create a new workflow. So what you can see here is that's pretty new. When in the past, you would have created a workflow directly from scratch, but now we have starting to provide a library of workflow templates. So basically, every Dynatrace apps that is installed in your Dynatrace environment can ship workflow templates for you to make it easier to get started, to make it for it to be quicker to get started, and have also good example of things that you could use to automate your system. Now we're going to start now with a blank workflow because I want to explain some of the basic. So when you are in a new workflow, there is a couple of things you will see. You will see you are in a draft. So you can save it as a draft. I can save it, and I can work on it. It gets the status. It's a draft, so it's not published. It cannot be. It doesn't run automatically yet. It's for me to work on it. And what's really nice is you can, when I'm ready, I can deploy it. The nice thing about draft for the most advanced workflow that don't cost anything in terms of licensing. So the workflow, the standard workflow, they only start to be built once they are live. So it helps you to try things out without having to think too much about the licensing. And also, if you have it already in the live status, you can always create a new draft, meaning you can always have the live version that runs, and using the draft version to optimize, to test without being afraid of changing something that is right now running. So you can really have your time to work on the next iteration and having both versions running in parallel.
Cool. So that means, Sonia, the draft version is something that I can trigger manually then, so to test it out.
Exactly.
Perfect, yeah.
Exactly. So
Cool.
you can trigger it here. What you will see is here, this is a simple workflow at the moment. So when you start with creating a workflow, it starts being a simple workflow. Once you start adding more action, more than one, so only one action stays as a simple workflow, and more than one action, it will get transformed to a standard workflow, to a standard workflow. It has a licensing impact. So simple workflow, only one trigger and one action. A license don't have any workflow licensing cost, only the execution gets built. And for standard workflow, there is a workflow cost.
So
So
that
it's just to
means
make it.
if I recap, a simple workflow, even if it's live, also doesn't cost anything. The workflow itself, only if you have a standard workflow where it's more complex, then there's an additional licensing
Yeah,
cost, but only if it's live, not if you're in draft mode.
exactly.
Perfect.
Exactly. So the next thing that I'd like to explain is the trigger. So the trigger is the things that determines how and when your workflow should execute. And we have three categories of trigger. We have the event trigger, the schedule trigger, and the on-demand trigger. Event trigger is based on the events that are in Grail. So this is, for example, that trigger is the most generic one. You can use it for any events that is stored into Grail. You can see we have different kind of event type as things are stored into Grail. We have the events, the biz events, the system events, the security events, and you can use a filter query to refine on exactly which event you want to do this workflow to trigger. Obviously, the most popular type of event trigger we have is the problem trigger, because very, very often you want to react on a problem. And this is why we have implemented, we provide the problem trigger to make it a bit easier for you to consume. And it has some specific logic that is about problem trigger. Now, I want to do a quick recap on how alerting and notification works. This is something we have discussed also in our first video, but I think that's a very, very helpful picture to see.
Yeah.
So we have different alert configuration in Dynatrace. It could be a health alert coming from an observability app, maybe a service response time violation, an error rate that increase beyond a certain threshold. But it could be also something that is reported through an open pipeline extraction rule. It could be a custom alert, something that you in anomaly detector have defined as, oh, this is a problem, this is an alert. And when those something happens in your system and those alerts are raised, they are created in Dynatrace as Davis events. And you could, if you're curious, then look at them by going into a notebook and using the Grail fetch DT Davis events. You will see all the alerts that are being raised. And on big system, it can be a lot. And sometimes when you have a problem, it's not only one alert that is raised, but it can be 10 or 1,000 or even more of events. And what Dynatrace Intelligence does is create a problem and group them together, see what is linked, what is connected, and so that you have only one thing to look at with the list of all the alerts that are related. So for example, this problem would have been will group those events, and that one will group those events. And of course, you can see everything in the problem apps. And if you want to look at the underlying data in the Grail, it will be fetch DT Davis problem. And then now in the workflow, we are here and we say, okay, and I want to react to all the problems that have a certain category, all the problems that are interesting to me, to my team, to my system. And this is what you can define in the problem trigger. In the problem trigger, you can really say, okay, I want this workflow to be triggered for any problem that is occurring on things that are relevant to my team. And then you can, of course, have different kind of workflow. You could have a workflow that is for notification, like we showed in the last video, or you can have a workflow that is more advanced with some agentic step to help you do some auto remediation.
Cool. Awesome. So to quickly recap, I always like to recap on the very left. These are events. Event could be a CPU spike. It could be a high failure rate. It could be also a custom event. You can define when a certain log comes in, when a certain exception happens. So these are all then so-called Davis events. And if then some of these events are really impacting your end users, if it's impacting your service levels, then Dynatrace would basically say which of those events belong to a problem that really has an impact. This is when the problems come in. So this could be one event or multiple events that belong together. And then you can decide what to do with this problem. And you can define a standard workflow for notifications like we've seen it, or we can do more complex workflows, agentic workflows, to then not only trying to notify people, but eventually even remediate issues, right? I think that's cool. Yeah, it's a really cool overview. Thank you.
Exactly. And here again, you can have additional filter, and I'm going to copy something that I have prepared. So you can have, it will look at any data that is on the problem record, and the problem can be extended to have more custom data. There's certain way to do that, like the custom problem fields. And here I can click on query past events, and I can see, okay, for that specific thing. So here I have a custom property, SN group name, and app engine admins. So it comes to all the problems that are relevant for those app engine admins. And I can see, okay, if I would use the trigger as it is defined right now, I would have 50 events in the last hour, and that much in the last day, and that much in 7 days. Obviously, that's very high here. That's a demo system, but that's also a good help to see, okay, am I alerting on the right level? Do I get how many notifications, how often would that workflow be triggered, and to help to understand what is the scale behind that.
And it's also, I think it's a great example with the group name. This seems like some type of ownership information. So folks, when you have metadata on your deployments, on the events that are being detected by Dynatrace, I'm a big proponent, and you as well, right, with ownership, like team ownership, organizational ownership, group ownership. Then this metadata can also be propagated up to the problem. So if Dynatrace is detecting a problem based on different events, we can also enrich the problem with, hey, who is the owner of that problem? What type of line of business is this impacting? Is this a pre-prod or a prod environment? And based on this, you can now also define the filters to say, if it is in a pre-prod environment, maybe I'm just sending a simple notifications. If it's in a production environment, then I'm going to do a specific workflow for that particular ownership group. Yeah, so cool.
Yeah, we see that enriching the data as source, making sure that the data have the right metadata that we need for the automation is really key. So that's a very important topic.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have my trigger, and now, of course, when this happens, I want something to happen. So for that, we can add task, and task, we can choose actions to run from that task. And action is the list of actions that are provided, again, also from different Dynatrace apps. So we have some standard ones that are provided by the workflow app, which is execute a DQL query, HTTP request, the request approval, run a JavaScript, run a workflow. And we have many, many others that are provided from different apps. It could be create a ticket in Jira. Let's see.
Now you see a little bit more here because I know you are working on an internal environment where some folks have also installed some of their own apps or different versions. So folks, in case you wonder why does Sonia see so many and you see a little bit less, it is just because we're working on an internal environment. But it also shows every Dynatrace app not only can provide a workflow template that we've seen before, but apps can also provide their own workflow actions, which is like the Jira creation is task here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And also what's super important is that you might not have all the apps installed that ship those actions. So you can always look at the Dynatrace Hub to see if you are missing or if you want to look for an integration. And also if you realize something is missing, then let us know. Please write something on the community because we want to keep increasing that list. So it would be really interesting for us what integration are missing for you, what use case you are using, and that's something we'd love to learn.
Cool.
Yeah. And of course, then you can always run it. This one, I won't run it because I haven't configured it closely, but I want to go back by explaining the other trigger. So you can add a trigger and you can have an action, and then you can have, of course, more complicated action. And this I'm going to show you later how a workflow looks like with different paths and different conditions. But now I want to go back to the different trigger. And for that, I'm going to show you another workflow that I have prepared. So this is a workflow that goes more into the direction of reporting, because we know that reporting, and as you were saying on the first slide, and reporting is something that is easy to start with and to bring more awareness into your organization. It could be that weekly report that your boss is asking you to produce. Now you can use a workflow and have it automated and not having to do it by yourself every day. Or you can send information to people that might not be always checking Dynatrace, but then they'll get the information they need and they can decide to go deep dive if they want it. So here we are using an on-demand trigger, but we could use, if it was a real life and reporting, we would use a scheduling trigger. So we could either say we're using a fixed time trigger to always run the workflow at a specific time of day. So we could say, okay, it should run always at that time on. And then you see here that this is the calendar rules. So you can create rules the way you want it. So you can, let's have a look. You can say, okay, this is I want this rule to run only on Monday and Wednesday, but not and depending on your calendar. So you can also configure calendar, and then you can do things very, very advanced, like the second day of the month, but not if it's on holiday in America or in Austria. So you can really, really start doing very advanced things. Obviously, for reporting, you would say something like every week or once in a week, something like that. But now I'm still triggering on demand. So demand would be the last trigger that we have. It could be it's triggered by an API call. So it could be you use that workflow in an integration with another system and then it's being created, or you use it to only start it by yourself. Another next things I have is DQL action. So I'm sending a query to DQL because I want to gather the last problems from the last day. And so I have my query fetch DTD's problems from the last one day, and I sort them. I want only the field category and description. And then I sent this per email. So I use an email, and you see my email address, so feel free to reach out and best use the community. That would be easier. And what you see now is I have something that we haven't talked about yet, but that I want to talk about is the Jinja expression. So very often when you are using something from in a workflow, you want to reference data that came in the trigger if it's a problem trigger, or something that happened before in another step. And this you can do with Jinja expression. And for example, here you see result fetch problem DQL.records. that is the result that I got from my previous task that was called fetch problems with DQL. So let's run it first to have something to show.
Cool. So that means this would be a trigger. As you said, you could do this once a day. It basically executes a certain query, and then the result will then be nicely formatted and sent via email. That's cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
And now
yeah.
that it's run, I am in the workflow execution. So you see I'm here, I'm seeing exactly the result for that specific execution that I run. And here I can see exactly what happened. So I have the logs. And this view with as much detail is only available also for the standard workflow. So not for the simple workflow. For the simple workflow, we don't save every data. We have somewhere to get in execution information. I'm going to show it a bit later, but this advanced view where I can go here and look at the result for every workflow run, this is only for standard workflow.
Cool.
So here I see, so that was the input. So that was what we have configured for the action. This is my DQL query, and this is the result that we got at the time. So this is the result. And what's interesting more is the record. So I can see here, okay, I have all those records with the event category, availability, and then the description, as this is the two fields that I have asked for. And then here, the problem summary got this. And of course, I want to format it in a nice way. And this is why I use here those Jinja expression. And I just want to show you a bit of the documentation because this makes it easier to understand. So what is Jinja? Jinja is a templating engine that allows for dynamic configuration in workflow. And there's kind of two different kind of delimiter. There is that one is used for expression. So it's everything that you need to access data from the task that happened before the task you are in, from execution, for function, from the trigger. From if it's a problem trigger, you'll get access to the problem information. But then you also can use that format for statements and control structure. So you can loop and have condition into the task. And now, and you can see there's different functions that
really
you can
cool.
look.
Yeah.
And so if you're curious to how does a loop looks like, you find example to help you. So that will help you. Let's see. And when you work on this, you always get, if you click, I'm just going to do it once more. If you click here on the Maximus, you have also the preview functionality. So you see how this would look like. So it's very, very helpful to help you build your integration. And you can, I'm just going to copy that one because I have a bad keyboard. And then you see with the auto-completion what's available. So if I want to have some information about the environment, maybe I want to use a link or I want to see what's happening, and then I can see, okay, I have some information on the environment. So you see all the data that is available. It's about the environment, the trigger, and the result from the other task, like that result fetch problem.dql. And here we are just iterating on the different records and adding the keys for the first line, so to make sure that we have the information we need. And then we are, for each key, we are iterating and using a nice format to make them a bit more readable.
Cool. Yeah, extremely powerful. And also thank you for pointing out the documentation, folks. If you are watching this, we also make sure that these links to the documentation pages that Sonia is showing will be part of the description of the video. They're super helpful.
Perfect. Now I've told you the execution that you see here. So you see the list of execution, and you can click on it to see what happens and if there were any problem. I've just told you that's only available for standard workflow. What's available for both simple workflow and standard workflow are the system events, and that's also something I wanted to let you know. That's here. So we are on the documentation of Dynatrace into the data model semantic dictionary. And I wanted to show you there is some of the workflow events are stored to Grail as system event. And we have, for example, the workflow execution event that tells you everything about a workflow when it's executed and its results. We have the workflow lifecycle events when something important changes to the workflow. We have also the task execution event. So if you want to go more into detail, you have to understand what happened at each level of the workflow. And with that, it's available for both simple and standard workflow. And with that, you can build yourself you can use dashboard or notebook to also build a visualization to understand how your workflow doing. So if you're interested in more visibility into your workflow, and we are going to provide, I think we are going to start working on an out-of-the-box already made dashboard, but at the moment you can do it yourself. And I know some people have worked on some visualization like that to visualize, okay, what are the workflow that have more frequently problems that you should look at, try to optimize. Maybe also you want to look at time it took to run if suddenly a workflow starts to take more time to run. So you can also, of course, monitor and observe how your workflows are doing.
Cool. So that means every time a workflow gets executed, every time it makes a significant change in the status, everything is basically also stored in Dynatrace in a system event, which means you can do two things, right? A, you can obviously report here, but I assume you could even use that to trigger another workflow. So assuming if you have workflows that are failing, you may want to even then trigger another workflow that notifies people that certain workflows are failing or things like that, right? Just things come to mind.
Exactly. You can again do on the both sides the visibility, bring more visibility, awareness, and also automate things and report automatically on problems or on changes that are relevant to you.
Cool. Wow. So system events, folks, again, link to the documentation about system events. The system event model is also part of the video description.
One very important thing that I haven't told you before we go into the bigger example, it's about actor. So if I go to the settings, you will see the workflow options and you'll see who is the owner and who is and which actor, which user is being used for the actor. Of course, to be able to be triggered by event triggered, to be able to run something, to run a decal, you need permission. And this is the permission of that user that will be taken. So if you are building a workflow for yourself or reporting for you, something that is really limited to yourself, it's fine to use your own user. But best will be as soon as it's live and it's something that is used for your team, so notification for your team or something that is go behind that with automatic resolution, it would be best practice to use a service actor.
So that
Because
means that makes also a lot of sense. That especially as maybe people move around, or you just wanna create actors for a particular task or for a particular. It's basically almost like a role, right? That you specify. Cool.
Yeah, and then you have, it's best practice to have well-defined security boundaries because your user might be able to do more, but for that workflow, you want to make sure that what the workflow can do is limited, and also to make sure that if you change role, then the workflow will still work for the team and not have to look, and everybody will have to maintain them and change it. So it's really for while you're coding it, trying it, and developing, it's totally fine. And it is something that's really helped only you, that's visible only to you, then it's fine. But as soon as it goes into team workflow and something that is shared and has value for more people in the organization, it should be a service actor.
Cool. And Sonia, as you are on this page, I know there's a couple of other options here. Description is clear for me. That's a human readable description about what the workflow does. Always makes sense. It's a good practice. The execution limit is also interesting to know. So how many executions do you allow per hour? I guess this also prevents any type of misconfiguration and misuse, or just allows you to control better how many executions you have. And for me, the cool thing is then coming later. This is the default input. So that means you can have some global properties that on the one side, every task in the workflow can access. So it's some global defaults. But if you're calling, I guess, a workflow from another workflow, that workflow that calls a sub workflow can also pass in and override those input values. So which makes it cool to componentize and parameterize.
Yeah, exactly. And the last one is the workflow guide, something I wanted to show you. So you will notice when you create workflow from the templates that we have delivered that the guide will pop up and you will see it. And this one, I used a template to build it. I made some changes, but it started from a template. So I have a guide, and guide is a markdown that is saved with your workflow that gives you some information on how to set it up, and that we're using as documentation for the templates. You could, once your workflow has been created, choose to just remove it. You could also make some changes because you find it's helpful and you want to change some things for your team. And that's, you can of course minimize it so it's not on the web, but it's very, it will open up the first time you create a workflow from it, so that the person that sets it up gets all the information they need to be able to use that template or any workflow you want to share.
Yeah, thanks for the guides. This makes it, especially in more complex workflows, the guide then directly gets you to the different tasks or the different options. So it's really powerful and also obviously well documented, folks. Exactly. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. So now let's jump into the most interesting workflow I wanted to show you. And actually, that's two workflows. So this is the Kubernetes troubleshooting workflow. First is the orchestrator. So we have, what do we have here? We have an event trigger. So you remember we talked about the different kind of workflow trigger, the event base, we have the generic event one, we have the problem event, and now we have here the Davis event trigger. So you remember on that screen, let me show you, we said, it's really nice because you can use the workflow, the problem trigger to trigger a workflow based on a problem. And in most of the use case, it makes sense to have specify on a problem, but in some case you want to react on a specific alert, not on the problem, which is the container. So you can use the Davis event trigger to react with workflow on specific events that are really the one that you want something to happen. So this is what is being done in that case. And then there is a bit of JavaScript to
can you do me just one quick favor?
Yeah.
Can you go back, just highlighting the filter here? That's perfect. So that basically you say this workflow should trigger for a particular Kubernetes namespace. I think this is also very important. When you set up these workflows, you can really be very specific because it should not be executed for every Davis event, but only for those where you have a Kubernetes anomaly detection, the online shop in this case, the cluster name is also specified, so you can be very specific, which is also great because this gives teams a lot of autonomy to specify which workflow should be executed for their particular cluster, namespace, app, so you can filter on anything. Yeah.
And then we have a JavaScript step that is just about merging together the input from the Davis event with some other, with the inputs parameter of the workflow. So you remember we saw it, but we can just take a look again. So we see here, there is some input, so that is used to customize the workflow. So here we say, okay, we don't want to generate pull requests, but we want to generate recommendations. So there's a bit of customization, and that is passed together with the Davis event into another workflow. So we are using run workflow. So it's running a sub workflow, but before, and we passed as input what we have prepared. So the mix in that step. And what's super interesting is the workflow condition, is the workflow options. So workflow options, again, this is only available for standard workflow, not for simple workflow. You can use it to say, okay, before a task, before something happens, I want to wait a bit because maybe something will, I'm waiting for an answer or I'm waiting for a restart. So you can also use waiting. You can also loop over an action. And here what we are using is the retry on error. So we are retrying that whole workflow maximum 5 times, and we are waiting 60 seconds between each retry. So if it fails, then it will retry and retry and retry and retry 5 times until it fails. Cool. So you can use more control into your workflow and more resistance, and you can really think about different scenario when you're waiting for a different system and make it operational, your workflow. Now let's look at the workflow. I've already opened it. So now this is the very interesting workflow. What happened? It's been triggered in demand, yes, from the other workflow. And then it will create, it will run, let me make that a bit bigger. different DQL queries to get all the information that is needed. So get the metrics that are related, get CPU metrics, memory logs, related events, changes, health alerts, so all information, Smartscape, and we look at what was previously tried. So this is something that's being saved later as information as events, so that the workflow, this agentic workflow, because this is an agentic workflow you'll see later, will get information what was previously tried, so that it doesn't do, if it failed, doesn't try to redo the same thing. So also a bit of learning from it. And now we have that agentic step from Dynatrace Intelligence. It's still in preview. So you might not have access to it yet, but it's good to know that it exists, that the preview is available and you can look for it. And here we prompt Dynatrace with some information. So with the information about the problem, the timestamp, some YAML definition, and ask to try to find a solution to the problem.
Cool. This is really cool. So, Sonia, if I can recap quickly.
Please.
Dynatrace detects an anomaly on Kubernetes. It triggers that first workflow that you had. That workflow is basically an orchestrator that then says, hey, I have a Kubernetes problem. I have enriched it with some global definitions like pull request, yes or no. Then it calls this troubleshooting agent, and this troubleshooting agent now really does what you expect from an agent. It captures more information in the context of this particular problem. I assume these queries on the top, they filter on the cluster, the app, the namespace, capturing more information, also querying information about previous attempts when this agent actually was engaged. And then we're using the prompt task here that you have and really asking Dynatrace and say, hey, Dynatrace, here's a lot of evidence. Here's some additional context. And now you are the Kubernetes expert helping troubleshooting an ongoing Kubernetes issue. So these are then the classical instruction files. So, but everything is built in a Dynatrace agentic workflow. Dynatrace is where the data is. This is where we have easy access to all of the observability data. And now with workflows and access to our Dynatrace Intelligence, you can then do what you would normally also do if you are in your IDE and you're triggering a Copilot or Cloud Code. So you can do everything from here. That's pretty cool.
And here there's different paths. So one path would be to then create, so first is to write information into the system. What is the suggestion? So that's, those previous attempt information, that's that path. And then there is the path to extract the YAML changes, because it might find out that it's a deployment problem. So we'd recommend to apply a different YAML for the configuration. And then here we have that request approval step, because we still want to have a bit of control, human in the loop. And here Dynatrace will send a request approval that will be sent as email. More channel will be added very soon, like the Slack approval request is coming over this summer. So you'll have more way to request for approval. But this will send an email to the configure group. And then with the information, what will be done, and if somebody agrees, here we have another path that goes through it, because it's a demo. So after 1 minute, we just timed out and we continue. But in a real world scenario, we will wait for it. And then we again send an event to say, okay, we are going to apply the fix. We use the Kubernetes action. So that's again, this is the Kubernetes connector that you can use to deploy things from a workflow. So you apply that configuration, then wait a bit. If you see here, we wait a bit, 15 minutes to see, okay, did it work? And then with a new DQL query, we check, okay, is it now closed? Is everything okay? And then we also verify that there is no new event, no new problem that have. There is another way where we could use, instead of doing it to Dynatrace, so Dynatrace deploying the fix, it could be that we create a GitHub issue, and then the whole fix happened in GitHub with pull request and validation and auto deploy with GitOps. Could be totally depending on how you're doing it in your environment.
Hey, Sonia, this Kubernetes troubleshooting agent, I believe, is one of the default ones, right? One that comes with a template. That means.
Yes, there is, yeah, exactly. There is one template that is, I'm not sure if that's exactly that one because it's a demo version that we are using in our system, but it's one that is available. So when you create a new workflow, you will see here Dynatrace Intelligence preview, and you will see different one. And here we have the Kubernetes operation agent. Yeah,
Awesome.
so you can use it and see what is needed. Yeah, and this one. So we have different versions. This one uses Jira, and then you can see what you get and try that. Yeah. But there's different one and more templates, both agentic and not agentic, are going to be added very soon because there are use cases where it makes totally sense to have an agentic step that helps you to compute some information together, prepare a patch. But there are many other scenarios where it's really clear what you want to achieve and that don't need an agentic step. So it's of course always depending on the situation.
Cool. So if I recap, then workflows are truly capable now to not just do a single or a simple notification like we've discussed in the first video. By the way, folks, the first video is also linked in this one. But we can really go from, I would say, medium complex to definitely agentic workflows where you can loop through a problem until it's really fixed. You can leverage the Dynatrace Intelligence where you can really prompt an LLM to say, this is my evidence. There's additional evidence that I captured. Now, please let me know what should be the next thing to do. What I really like is the approach of if that agentic workflow ran in the past for this problem, you can also go back and figure out what has been tried, what has worked, what hasn't worked. So it's basically like you're learning, you're leveraging the lessons learned from the past. All of the stuff that you've shown is available in Dynatrace. I know you said the Dynatrace Intelligence workflows, the agentic workflows are still in preview, but folks, we will also link the preview to the video so that you can sign up for the preview in case you want to try this already. Thank you again for the one-on-ones. I think we covered really everything. Jinja expressions, super powerful. Approvals, there's more coming beyond email. Maybe one question on the approvals. I would assume the way the approvals work is also through events or through API calls. So that means in theory, you can also make the approval request somehow else.
Yeah, exactly. You could also integrate it from another system.
Cool. Sub workflows, super cool. So you can componentize like a good software engineer would do. You componentize your logic. And I know everybody's crazy these days about coding agents. I know we have DTCTL, which is a tool that we have open sourced that can also not only download workflows from Dynatrace, but you can also then connect it with your coding agent. So that means while we have a lot of great templates and we have a lot of people that can manually craft these workflows, you can obviously also leverage your coding agents to create or update your workflows.
Optimize, exactly.
Optimize, yeah. Cool. Awesome. Sonia, anything else? Any final words?
Yeah, I had one last thing that I just wanted to put out here for people to know. People like to use workflow for all kinds of scenarios, and I just wanted to let you know what it would not be the optimal scenarios for using Dynatrace workflows, and it's everything that has to do with massive data processing, where you have like lots and lots of data that you want to ingest, or lots of data that you want to export. Of course, bit of ingest from some metadata to use in the workflow is totally fine. But when it's about thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of data points that you want to ingest into Dynatrace or export, then Dynatrace Workflow is not the right solution for it. It's more business processing, and we are saving a lot of data with it. So every operation that's being done is saved in system events, and for a standard workflow, all the results are there for for the audit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a solution to import or export massive data or to process massive data. But if you have a need for that, then I would recommend to look at Open Pipeline or to look at what you can do with a Dynatrace extensions, because they are better suited for that use cases.
Yeah, thanks for pointing this out. Obviously, it's very tempting to just create a workflow that every minute runs and pulls data in from an API. But folks, we have so many different ways to push data into Dynatrace, also pull it out. Thanks for providing the suggestions here. Cool. Hey, Sonia, thank you so much. I learned a ton. I'm really happy that the workflows are getting so much attention because we see how not only is it important to have data in Grail, but also to act upon that data. So I think that's very important. We've seen some great use cases. To wrap it up, we have shown you how you can go from simple notifications, which is typically a good way to get started, get notified in case something is wrong, but really moving towards we call it here human in the loop, agentic operations, leveraging workflows to fetch more data when a problem comes in, leverage Dynatrace Intelligence to ask for what would be the best next thing to do, also considering what happened in the past, and then also integrate this either with opening up a GitHub issue, directly interacting with the Kubernetes API, or whatever target system you have. Yeah. Thanks, Sonia. As I know, there's always more coming from this part of the product. I'm sure I'll have you back. But for today,
Perfect.
thank you.
Thank
Danke.
you.
Ciao.
Bye.